The candlelight flickers across polished mahogany, and the whole room stops breathing. Luca Bianchi sits motionless at his private booth in the back corner of Giacomo's, a restaurant where Seattle's elite pay $300 for handmade pasta and the privilege of being ignored by waitstaff who know their names but pretend they don't. His hands rest on the table in front of him. These hands have signed documents that ended careers. These hands have been kissed by men who feared him. These hands are trembling. Marco and Nino stand 3 paces back, their shoulders rigid in tailored charcoal suits that cost more than most people earn in a month. In 15 years of working for Luca Bianchi, they have never seen him sit still like this. Never seen the color drain from his face like water through a cracked glass. Never seen a man who commands an empire reduce himself to someone waiting. The kitchen door opens. A 7-year-old girl emerges into the restaurant's soft amber light. Her name is Emma. She is wearing a denim jacket 3 sizes too large, sleeves rolled up so her small fingers can grip what she is carrying, a folded piece of paper, torn from a receipt pad, creased and wrinkled from being clutched in a child's desperate fist. The conversations around the room die mid-sentence. Forks pause. Wine glasses stop halfway to lips. Emma walks past the stunned waitstaff, past tables where women in jewelry that costs more than houses pretend not to stare, and she places the note directly into Luca's palm. His jaw clenches so tight that a vein bulges on his temple like a warning. He unfolds the paper. The handwriting is uneven, the letters large and careful, the way a young child writes when she is trying very hard to be understood. The lady with the black eye saved me. Mr. Hale and the mean woman tried to take me away, but she hid me. Behind Emma stands a woman in a dishwasher's uniform stained with grease and what might be blood. Her face is half hidden in shadow, but what is visible destroys everything in the room's carefully balanced silence. One eye is swollen completely shut, the skin around it purple bleeding into black. Her throat is mapped with handprints, deep bruises in the shape of fingers, like someone tried to choke the sound out of her and nearly succeeded. Her split lip is still bleeding, fresh red, and she sways on her feet but positions her body between the child and everyone else. Her name is Nora Morgan, though Luca does not know this yet. Though in a few moments, it will be the only name that matters. The silence in Giacomo stretches like the moment before a storm breaks. Someone's water glass sits abandoned on a table. Ice melts inside it, the only sound in the entire restaurant, that soft tick, tick, tick of frozen water becoming liquid again. Luca stares at the note in his hand. He stares at his daughter. His daughter, whom he has been searching for 48 hours, whom he believed was already dead or worse, whom he had begun bargaining with a god he stopped believing in 20 years ago. Marco takes one small step forward. Boss. Luca does not move. Does not speak. Does not even blink. He is somewhere else entirely, in a place where a child ceases to exist, where the world becomes hollow. Then he looks up. His eyes find Nora Morgan across the room, and something cold and dangerous stirs in his chest like a predator waking from sleep. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. What happens next will change everything. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Go back 6 months, to a morning when Nora Morgan woke up in the backseat of a 2004 Honda Civic that had not run in 3 days, surrounded by everything she owned in the world. The car was parked behind a Shell station on Highway 99, where the noise of traffic never stopped. Where truckers came to use the bathrooms and buy coffee at 3 in the morning. Where Nora washed her face in a bathroom sink using paper towels and a bar of soap stolen from a motel 6 months ago. Where she counted her money every morning and discovered she had less than the day before. $78. That was all she had left. She counted it 3 times. Folded bills on her thigh in the grey pre-dawn light filtering through the Honda's dirty windows. 1s and 5s mostly. 320 she had been saving for the absolute ending, the moment when she would have to choose between buying a bus ticket to somewhere else or staying in Seattle and admitting that everything had broken irreparably. On the passenger seat sat the eviction notice. 12 days. That is what the red ink said across the bottom. 12 days until she lost the storage unit where her mother's furniture still sat, covered in plastic, waiting for a future that would never come. Her mother's furniture was all she had of her mother now. Photographs were gone. Letters burned. But the oak dining table her mother had bought at an estate sale in 1998, the kitchen chairs where Nora had done homework, the bedroom dresser where she had hidden her diary, those pieces were still there, still waiting in a climate-controlled box that cost $218 a month. She could not pay it. She had known this for 3 weeks. She just had not admitted it yet. Nora Morgan was 27 years old and looked like she had lived 40. Her hair, which used to be dark brown, had faded to something closer to dishwater from years of living outside. Her eyes were hollow in a way that had nothing to do with not sleeping, though she had not slept more than 2 hours in a row in months. Her hands were calloused from washing dishes, her nails broken and stained, the cuticles cracked and bleeding in tiny places from the industrial soap at Giacomo's. She dressed in the dark, black pants already damp from a leak in the car's roof, a white button-up shirt from a thrift store that she had washed in a bathroom sink the night before. No bra under it because she owned 3 bras total and 2 of them were in the laundromat currently going through a wash cycle she could not afford to complete. She would need to go back and retrieve them in the next 6 hours or they would be thrown away. Everything was time-based now. Everything was a calculation of what she could do in the space between jobs. She pulled her hair back using a rubber band that had lost its elasticity 3 weeks ago. It barely held. Her reflection in the mirror was a stranger. She did not look at it anymore. Did not need to see what loss looked like in full detail. The knowing was enough. The Honda's clock said 5:51 in the morning. She had to be at Giacomo's by 6:30. The morning prep shift, which paid minimum wage for 6 hours of chopping vegetables, marinating meats, and setting up the line for the dinner staff. Her manager Douglas Hale usually worked the morning shift. Douglas Hale, who was 43 and built like someone who had spent his 30s in a gym he could no longer afford. Douglas Hale, who wore cologne that cost as much as she spent on food in a week. Douglas Hale, who had informed her last month that if she wanted to keep her job, she needed to understand that tips were part of her compensation, and if customers were not tipping her, it was because she was not performing at the level he required. This was how he had explained stealing her tips. As if it were a performance evaluation. Nora started the car. It turned over on the second try, which felt like luck. Everything was luck now. The luck of a car starting. The luck of a manager not being in a rage. The luck of finding half a sandwich in the employee refrigerator that no one had claimed. As she pulled out onto Highway 99, a billboard passed on her left. It showed a family of 4 laughing in front of a house with white columns and green shutters. The text underneath said, "Own your dream home. 3.9% April." She did not look at it for long. These billboards were everywhere. They were designed to hurt people like her. They were designed to make her understand the exact distance between where she was and where she was supposed to be. The rain started as she turned onto the street where Giacomo's sat, wedged between a luxury jewelry store and a boutique hotel that charged $400 a night for rooms that overlooked Puget Sound. Inside Giacomo's, Marco pushed through the kitchen doors carrying a tray of prepared fish. The smell of basil and lemon filled the air, expensive, clean, nothing like the must and old grease that followed him everywhere else. 3 blocks away, in a downtown office on the 42nd floor, Douglas Hale made a phone call. $78. That was everything. Nora Morgan sat in the driver's seat of her 2004 Honda Civic parked behind a Shell station on Aurora Avenue, her hand shaking as she counted the crumpled bills and coins spread across the steering wheel. 150. 2 20s. 8 singles. The rest in quarters and dimes that clinked softly as she pushed them into a pile. $78 stood between her and absolute nothing. She had 7 days to find another job, another shift, another way to survive, because the eviction notice taped to her windshield that morning had arrived in a red envelope with numbers printed in red ink. 12 days. Her landlord had given her 12 days to pay the 3 months of back rent she owed, which added up to $4,200. Money that did not exist anywhere in her world. Money that might as well have been $1 million. She placed the bills back into her wallet with the care of someone handling sacred objects. The wallet was cloth, faded blue, held together on one side with a safety pin. Her mother had given it to her 15 years ago. Before the divorce. Before her father stopped calling. Before the world decided that Nora Morgan was the kind of person you could hurt without consequences. She tucked the $78 inside and locked the car door, even though there was nothing inside worth stealing. The bathroom at the Shell station smelled like industrial cleaner and stale urine. A fluorescent light above the mirror flickered with the irregular heartbeat of something dying. Nora filled the chipped sink with cold water and dunked her face, gasping at the shock of it. There was no hot water at the station. There had not been hot water at the station for weeks, maybe months. She dried her face on brown paper towels that scratched her skin like sandpaper, then pulled her work clothes from a plastic bag she kept wedged under the passenger seat. Black pants. White shirt. The uniform of invisibility. She brushed her teeth using the water from her gallon jug, water she had filled at the shelter 3 days ago. The toothpaste was the cheapest kind, tasted like chemical sweetness and regret. As she stood there looking at her reflection, she could see the exhaustion mapped across her face like a territory that had been conquered and abandoned. Her eyes were a pale gray that her mother used to call storm eyes, but the storms had faded to something closer to ash. Her dark hair, once thick, had grown thin from malnutrition. She was 29 years old but looked 40. The mirror did not lie. Mirrors never lied. By 5:06 a.m., she was sitting in her car again, watching the sun begin its slow rise over Seattle. The October cold was a living thing. It cut through her threadbare coat like a blade wrapped in ice. Dead leaves skittered across the cracked pavement of the parking lot, driven by wind that came down from the mountains and showed no mercy. Her breath came out in visible clouds that dissipated almost instantly, as if her body heat was so insignificant the world would not even acknowledge it. She had worked at Giacomo's for 18 months. 18 months of double shifts, of standing on her feet for 12 hours at a time, of watching other servers pocket tips that should have belonged to her. The restaurant sat on a street in downtown Seattle lined with luxury boutiques and 5-star hotels. Giacomo's was upscale Italian, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables that cost more than Nora's car, where the smell of garlic and wine and fresh-baked bread made her stomach ache with a hunger that went deeper than physical need. Her shift started at 6 a.m. with the breakfast service. The kitchen hummed with quiet efficiency. 3 cooks moved like dancers, each knowing their role without words. The smell of espresso and butter and herbs filled the air, clean, expensive, nothing like the smell that followed Nora everywhere else. She pulled on her apron and began preparing tables. Water glasses. Napkins folded into triangles. Silverware arranged with precision, even though her hands trembled with exhaustion. By 10 a.m., she had served 23 customers. Businessmen in suits that cost more than everything she owned. Couples on what looked like anniversary dates. A woman alone reading a book while she ate eggs Benedict and sipped coffee from a cup so delicate it looked like it would shatter under a whisper. Nora had been trained to be invisible. She moved between tables as a shadow moves across a wall, present but not noticed, helpful but not seen. This was the job. At 11:11 a.m., she counted her tips in the break room. $43. She counted it 3 times, spreading the bills and coins across the table. $43 meant she could buy gas, eat for 4 days if she was careful, maybe find a pair of socks without holes. She placed the money in the ceramic tip jar that the restaurant provided, a blue and white Sicilian design, utterly out of place next to the broken microwave and the refrigerator that hummed like a trapped animal. Douglas Hale found her standing at the sink, washing her hands. He was 42 years old, with slicked back hair the color of wet concrete and fingernails that looked like they had been manicured that morning. He wore a suit that hung perfectly on his broad shoulders, and he smelled like cologne that cost as much as Nora spent on food in a month. His smile, when he offered it to customers, was the smile of a man who had never heard the word no. His voice, when he spoke to her, was smooth as oil. "Nora," he said. His tone suggested he had been looking for her. She turned from the sink, drying her hands on a white towel. Yes? The tip jar. You must have me counted. He was not asking a question. He was making a statement disguised as conversation. Behind him, the break room seemed to grow smaller. The broken microwave stopped humming. The refrigerator continued its trapped animal sound. I counted 3 times, Nora said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. $43. Douglas Hale stepped closer. Not aggressively, but close enough that she could smell the cologne and something underneath it, something chemical and sharp. You counted wrong. His smile had not changed. Because I was watching the register during the breakfast service. I know exactly how much you made in tips. And it was not $43. Nora's chest tightened. I also know, he continued, his voice dropping to a frequency that only she could hear, that you have been stealing from the register. Small amounts. 1s and 5s here and there. Hoping no one would notice. He tilted his head slightly, as if studying an insect pinned to a board. Did you think no one would notice? I have never stolen anything, Nora said. The words came out with the certainty of someone telling the truth, but they sounded like lies even to her own ears. That is a shame, Douglas Hale said, because if I tell corporate that you have been stealing, they will not investigate. They will simply fire you. And given that you have no other job prospects, no references that matter, and you are living in your car, I imagine that would be a problem. He stepped back, and his smile widened. Unless you want to discuss this with the owner directly. Your choice. Nora swallowed. The taste in her mouth was copper and shame. I will put the money back. I know you will, Douglas Hale said. Now get back to work. We have a lunch rush starting in 5 minutes, and you are scheduled until the dinner shift ends. That is 14 more hours. Do not disappoint me. He walked out of the break room, his shoes clicking on the tile floor with the sound of a clock marking time. Nora stood alone at the sink. Her hands were shaking. She placed them under cold water again, but the cold did not help. Nothing helped. She dried her hands, took off the towel, and walked back onto the dining room floor to take orders from people who would never know her name. 3 months into this routine, on her single day off each week, Nora began volunteering at Cedar Grove Homeless Shelter, a converted gymnasium on the south side of Seattle where families with nowhere else to go slept on cots in rows. The work was unpaid, which meant it was the only honest labor she did anymore. She served breakfast, oatmeal with brown sugar, toast with peanut butter, juice boxes in flavors that made children's eyes light up. Orange. Grape. Strawberry. Colors for small moments of joy. That was where she first saw Emma. The girl appeared on a Tuesday morning in late July, sitting alone at one of the long tables, her small hands wrapped around a plastic spoon. She was 7 years old, though she looked smaller, as if life had compressed her. She had dark curls that fell past her shoulders, and eyes that did not belong in a 7-year-old face. Eyes that had seen things. Her clothes were clean but ill-fitting, a pink sweater 2 sizes too large, jeans with a safety pin holding a torn seam. She clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, the other rabbit ear worn soft from constant handling. Nora had been trained not to ask questions. The shelter had a rule: accept the people who came, feed them, offer a safe place to sleep, and do not dig into their stories unless they offer the story themselves. Some children came with parents. Some came with social workers. Some came alone. Cedar Grove did not ask. Cedar Grove just helped. But Emma was different. Emma did not speak, did not play with the other children, did not do anything but sit in the corner of the gymnasium and watch the world with an expression that looked like waiting. She waited for the volunteers to finish serving breakfast. She waited through the hours of the morning. She waited as if something was coming, something that required all of her attention and all of her stillness. On her second Tuesday, Nora knelt beside Emma's cot during the afternoon hours when most of the shelter was quiet. The gymnasium felt cavernous and small at the same time, high ceilings, empty space, the echo of voices that had moved on. Emma's stuffed rabbit sat on the pillow next to her head. "What is your rabbit's name?" Nora asked. Emma did not respond. She looked at Nora with those old eyes, and then she looked away. "I think he looks like a snowball," Nora said. "Or maybe buttons." "Do you like buttons?" "I have a sweater with blue buttons." "You could name him Blue if you wanted." Still nothing. But the girl's hand moved slightly, reaching toward the rabbit, and Nora understood that she was listening. "I am Nora," she said. "I come here on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I make breakfast and clean up, and I sit with people, and I listen if they want to talk. But I do not push people to talk if they do not want to. Talking is hard." "I understand that." Emma's eyes closed. Just for a moment. Just long enough to suggest that somewhere inside the small, silent girl, someone was listening. The next week, Nora brought an extra juice box, apple juice, Emma's favorite by then. The week after that, she brought a sweater with blue buttons that she had found at a thrift store for $2. She had not eaten lunch that day to afford it. Emma accepted the sweater without speaking, but she wore it the following Tuesday. By September, it was understood without words that Emma was Nora's responsibility on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The other volunteers accepted this. Something in Nora's protective posture, something in the way she sat close enough to the girl that they were almost touching but not quite, suggested that Emma belonged to her in some way that transcended paperwork and official custody. What Nora did not know was that Emma was not homeless. 3 blocks away from Cedar Grove Homeless Shelter, in a downtown office on the 42nd floor of a building made of glass and steel, a man sat behind a mahogany desk and made decisions that would reshape the city. His name was Douglas Hale, and he was not the man who managed restaurants. That was a lie, though Nora Morgan did not yet know it. That Douglas Hale was a servant, a facilitator, a small part of a much larger operation that moved money and goods and people through Seattle like a circulatory system moves blood through a body. The real Douglas Hale was 51 years old, with graying hair and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline. He had earned that scar 20 years ago in a warehouse outside Portland, and he had earned the respect of every person in the underworld who knew what that scar represented. He had contacts in 3 states. He had lawyers on retainer. He had politicians who returned his calls. And he had a new business opportunity that required a specific kind of leverage. At the same moment that Nora was kneeling beside Emma's cot, making her whisper promises of safety that she could not guarantee, Douglas Hale was making a phone call to a woman named Catherine Mercer. "The girl is perfect," Catherine Mercer said. Her voice came through the speaker like ice forming on glass. "When can we have her?" Douglas Hale looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the space between the towers where the poor lived invisible lives. "Soon," he said. "Very soon." The walk-in freezer at Giacomo's was so cold that breath turned to fog before it left your mouth. Nora Morgan stood at the metal shelves, counting the white dinner napkin she had folded during her break, trying not to think about the $127 that had disappeared from the locked employee cabinet that morning. All week she had saved those tips, crumpled ones, a few fives, collected like prayer from tables where people left money like they left their consciences at the door. That money was supposed to last her 14 days. Now it was gone. The fluorescent light overhead hummed like an insect trapped in glass. She pushed out of the freezer and found Douglas Hale in the hallway, checking his phone. He was 51, with graying hair and a scar running from his left temple to his jawline like someone had tried to split his face in half. His tie was silk, the color of dried blood. "I know you took it," Nora said. Her voice trembled, but she kept it steady. "The tips from Tuesday and Wednesday. I need that money. I have been sleeping in my car for 4 months and I need that money to eat." Douglas looked up slowly. His eyes were the kind of eyes that had looked at other people's suffering and found it acceptable. "Then maybe you should find a better job," he said. "Oh wait, no one else will hire someone with no address, right? You are a liability, Nora. A problem." Do you know how many women like you are standing outside right now, desperate to work for less than you do? She felt something break open in her chest. I am reporting you to corporate. I have been keeping a list. Every stolen tip. Every unpaid hour. Every. He moved faster than she expected. His hand clapped around her throat and shoved her backward. The impact with the freezer door knocked the air from her lungs. Cold burned through her shirt. His grip tightened, his thumb pressing into her windpipe, and for a moment she could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the terrible pressure of his hand and the metal cold against her spine. If you report me, he said quietly, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will tell them you have been stealing. I will tell them you are unstable, possibly violent. Who do you think they will believe, Nora? A manager with 8 years of service or a homeless woman who sleeps in her car? He released her. She collapsed to the freezer floor, gasping, her hands flying to her throat. The handprint was already forming, red and livid. He straightened his tie, walked out, and closed the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a lock turning. She sat on the floor for 11 minutes, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The cold seeped into her bones. Her throat screamed. She tasted blood from where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. That same night, at Cedar Grove homeless shelter across the city, Nora asked the coordinator, a tired woman named Margaret with grey streaking her hair like old lightning, if she had seen the little girl with the rabbit. Dark curls. Doesn't talk much. Usually comes on Tuesdays for breakfast. Margaret frowned. She checked the registry. No one by that description is registered here. Are you sure she was coming to our shelter? The words hit like a second hand around the throat. Nora searched the gymnasium, the courtyard, the storage rooms. She walked through the long hallway where mattresses lay on the concrete floor like graves. Emma was gone. Simply gone, like she had never existed at all. The rabbit, the quiet smile, the way she held Nora's hand with the trust of someone who did not yet understand that the world could betray her, all of it vanished without explanation. But what Nora did not understand was that 3 blocks away, on the 42nd floor of a building made of glass and steel, Catherine Mercer had just wired Douglas Hale the final payment. $35,000 for one small girl with dark curls. Catherine Mercer was 54 years old and had the kind of beautiful face that cruelty had not yet marked. She sat on the boards of 3 Seattle charities. She owned a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. She had lawyers and politicians and people who returned her calls. She had also developed a taste for commodities that could not be purchased through normal channels, things that required networks and silence and men like Douglas Hale who knew how to make problems disappear. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday night in October, the restaurant Giacomo's was alive with soft light and softer voices. Candlelight flickered across white tablecloths. Wine glasses clinked like small bells. Rosemary and roasted meat perfumed the air. Frank Sinatra sang from hidden speakers about the way you wear your hat. At the back corner booth, Luca sat between 2 men. Marco was broad-shouldered with scarred knuckles from 20 years of collecting debts. Nino was lean and watchful, a silver ring on every finger catching the candlelight. They came every Thursday at 8 p.m. The staff knew to give them distance and silence and whatever they ordered without asking questions. Nora worked in the kitchen, elbow deep in scalding dishwater that turned her hands red and raw. Her throat was still bruised. The swelling had gone down to a yellow-green stain under her jaw. That morning, when she had asked Douglas about her missing tips again, he had shoved her into the freezer door. The impact had split her lip open. She had worked through it, bleeding slightly into her apron, until Douglas told her to clean herself up or leave. At 8:06 p.m., she stumbled into the back alley for air. The October cold hit her like a fist. Dead leaves skittered past her feet. Wind moved through the narrow space between the buildings, carrying the smell of exhaust and rotting garbage. She coughed through the pain in her throat, tasting blood. That was when she heard it. A small, terrified whimper from behind the dumpster. She found Emma crouched in the darkness, her body curled tight like a question mark. The rabbit was still clutched to her chest, one ear torn. Emma's face was streaked with dirt and tears. She wore a velvet dress, expensive and now destroyed, now stained with things Nora did not want to identify. Her lips were blue. Her hands were ice. Nora dropped to her knees. "Emma? What happened? How did you get here?" The girl did not speak. She threw her arms around Nora's neck and held on like she was drowning. Nora wrapped her in her denim jacket, all she had to give, and Emma's small body shook against hers. Her mind raced. The shelter coordinator had said Emma was never registered. She had been missing for 3 weeks. Someone had brought her to this alley, behind this specific restaurant, and left her to die in the cold. "Did someone hurt you?" Nora whispered. Emma's lips moved. For words came out like broken glass. "The mean woman sold me." Nora's blood turned to ice water. She lifted Emma and carried her inside through the kitchen entrance, past the line cooks who stared with open mouths, past the walk-in freezer where Douglas Hale was checking inventory. He saw them. His face went white, the color of something dead. "What are you doing?" His voice cut across the kitchen like a blade. "Put that child down right now." Nora did not stop. She pushed through the swinging door into the dining room, holding Emma, and the restaurant changed. The soft conversation died. People turned. Forks stopped mid-air. And then Luca Bianchi rose slowly from his booth. His face drained of color. His hands reached out but stopped just short of touching, as if afraid his daughter might disappear like she had the night she vanished. Marco and Nino jumped to their feet. Hands moved toward concealed weapons. Nino froze mid-step. Marco's mouth fell open. "Emma," Luca said, and his voice cracked on her name like old leather breaking. The entire restaurant had gone silent. The kind of silence that comes before something terrible or beautiful or both. Emma lifted her head from Nora's shoulder and started to cry, deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere ancient inside her. "Daddy," she said, and the word broke something in the room. Luca moved like a man underwater, crossing the dining room in 4 strides. He reached for his daughter and Emma let go of Nora to fall into his arms. She was so small. He was so large. He held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. That was when Emma pulled something from the jacket pocket, a receipt, torn and stained. She handed it to her father. Luca read it. His jaw clenched. Written on it in Catherine Mercer's handwriting were 2 names and a time. An address. A transaction. When he looked up at Nora, she saw something she did not expect, not rage, but recognition. Recognition and a terrible understanding of what she had done tonight. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was different now. Quiet. Dangerous. Nora's voice came out hoarse, damaged by Douglas's hands, the man who manages this restaurant. Douglas Hale. And a woman Emma calls the mean woman. Catherine Mercer. They had her for 3 days. I found her behind the dumpster 20 minutes ago. Luca's hand moved to his phone. He made one call for Marco. Find Douglas Hale and Catherine Mercer. Bring them to the warehouse. Alive. He hung up without waiting for a response. He turned to Nora and for the first time, his full attention was on her, this woman covered in dishwater and blood, this woman who had carried his daughter through a kitchen like she was carrying something sacred. "You saved my daughter," he said. Nora shook her head. "I just brought her inside. You have been protecting her for months. At Cedar Grove Shelter. Every Tuesday." His eyes searched her face. "You are the woman who gives her juice boxes. Who sits with her? Who made her smile when I could not find her?" Nora stared. How did he know? How could he possibly know? "I have been looking for Emma for 3 days," Luca continued. "Every hospital. Every shelter. Every contact I have. 50 men searching a city of 800,000 people. And you found her in an alley. You brought her to me. Nora swayed on her feet. The exhaustion was catching up to her now, the fear, the realization that she had just walked into the presence of someone very powerful and very dangerous and that her life was about to change in ways she could not predict. Luca caught her before she fell, lowering her gently into the booth. A waiter appeared with water. Nino draped his coat over her shoulders. She stared at these men, clearly dangerous, clearly capable of terrible things, showing her gentleness. I need you to tell me everything, Luca said. And Nora did. She told him about 6 months of sleeping in her car, about the eviction notice with a red ink deadline waiting on her dashboard, about Douglas stealing her tips and threatening her and choking her in a freezer, about finding Emma at the shelter 3 months ago and falling in love with her small quiet self, about not knowing anything except that the girl needed protection and so Nora had given it. When she finished, Luca asked one question: why did you bring her to me? You did not know who I was. Nora met his eyes. I knew you came here every Thursday. I knew the staff treated you with respect and fear. I knew if Emma ran to you, she must know you. And I knew that little girl needed her father more than she needed anything else in the world. Silence. Then Luca reached across the table and took Nora's hand. He was careful. Gentle. As if she might break at the slightest pressure. In 15 years of working for him, Marco had never seen his boss touch anyone like this. He exchanged a glance with Nino that contained an entire conversation, one they would replay in their minds for years, trying to understand the exact moment everything changed. You are not going back to your car tonight, Luca said. You are not going back to Giacomo's ever. I am going to make sure you are safe. Nora pulled her hand back. Why? Why would you help me? I am nobody. You are the woman who saved my daughter when I could not find her myself, Luca said. You are not nobody. Not anymore. Not to me. Word count, 1998. 2 hours after the warehouse, the penthouse overlooking Puget Sound was silent except for the sound of Nora's breathing, shallow, careful, each inhale touching the bruised bones of her ribcage. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire north wall, the October night pressed against the glass like something alive. The city below glittered in clusters of gold and white, buildings rising into darkness, a world she had never inhabited, never expected to touch. Luca sat across from her on a white leather chair that probably cost more than 6 months of her old rent. His suit jacket was draped across the sofa behind him. His white shirt was open at the collar. A doctor had just finished examining her, a woman named Dr. Reeves who moved with professional efficiency, who did not ask questions, who simply documented the damage with clinical precision. Bruised trachea. Cracked rib. Severe contusions on her neck forming the exact shape of hands that had wrapped around her throat and squeezed. The medication will help with the pain, Dr. Reeves had said, placing bottles on the marble kitchen counter. Ice for the swelling. She should not work for at least 2 weeks. Then she had left. Just like that. In and out like a ghost. Now Nora sat on the edge of the sofa, her body angled away from Luca, her hands trembling in her lap. The trembling had started in the car on the way here. It had not stopped. It moved through her fingers like electricity, like her body was finally releasing 6 months of being held together by nothing but spite and hunger and the fear of disappearing completely. Emma is sleeping, Luca said. His voice came out like dark honey, warm and measured. The guest room has a bed she wanted. She brought her rabbit. She is safe. Nora nodded. She could not speak yet. Luca leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. He was a man built like a fortress, all broad shoulders and controlled power, but something in his posture now suggested he was trying to make himself smaller. Trying not to frighten her further. I need to tell you what happened, he said. What Douglas and Catherine were doing. I need you to understand that none of this was your fault. She finally looked at him. His eyes were dark gray, like storm water, and they held something that looked like rage wrapped in ice, directed not at her, but at the world that had allowed her to suffer this way. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down toward his cheekbone, thin and pale, a map of his own survival. Douglas Hale and Catherine Mercer were part of a trafficking network, Luca said. Each word was precise, each word a nail being driven into the coffin of the life they had been living. They targeted children from shelters and foster care. Children with no family. Children the system had already failed. Catherine sat on the board of Cedar Grove Shelter. She had access to records. She identified vulnerable children and flagged them. Nora's hands clenched into fists. Her nails bit crescents into her palms. Douglas coordinated logistics, Luca continued. He used his position at Giacomo's, his connections in the city. They moved children through networks, prepared them for sale to wealthy buyers. Emma was taken from her school 3 days ago. A planned kidnapping. A security guard was paid. They were moving her out of state tomorrow. The words landed like stones in still water. Tomorrow. They were going to take her tomorrow. Which meant Nora had found her with perhaps 12 hours to spare. Which meant she had almost been too late. Which meant the universe had given her one last desperate chance and she had grabbed it with both hands. You kept her safe when I could not find her myself, Luca said. You did everything right. But Nora stood abruptly. She walked to the window and pressed her palm against the glass. The cold seeped through immediately, shocking and real. Outside, the city sprawled beneath her like something conquered, like something that belonged to the man sitting behind her. Inside, she could see her own reflection, a woman with a swollen eye, bruises blooming across her throat in shades of purple and black, hair matted from dried blood. 30 years old, and she looked like she had survived a war. In many ways, she had. I should have done more, she whispered to her reflection. I should have asked more questions. I should have reported him sooner. I should have. Nora. His voice stopped her. She turned. Luca had not moved. He was still in that careful position, trying not to frighten her, trying to make himself small enough to fit into her breaking. You gave her 3 months of safety, he said. 3 months of knowing that someone would protect her. That is not nothing. That is everything. The weight of 6 months crashed down then. 6 months of sleeping in a car with the doors locked, windows fogged with her own breath. 6 months of washing her face in bathroom sinks, of eating cold food from a can, of watching her bank account count down like a bomb timer. The eviction notice. The $78 in her wallet. The way Douglas's hands had closed around her throat when she had threatened to call corporate. The way he had bent her backward over a freezer full of seafood and told her that nobody would believe her, that nobody cared about a woman like her, that she was nobody and she would always be nobody. Her legs gave out. She slid down the window glass, the cold seeping through her clothes, settling into her bones. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. Her breath came in gasps that seemed to tear the bruised tissue of her throat. She almost let go. In that moment, with her back against the glass and the city lights pressing down like a weight, she almost decided to disappear into the darkness and never come back. Then a small voice cut through the silence. Is the nice lady okay? Emma stood in the hallway wearing oversized pajamas provided by Luca, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, her dark eyes wide and solemn. She was 7 years old and she had survived things that would break most adults. And she was worried about Nora. Nora wiped her face with the heel of her hand. She steadied her breathing. She nodded at the girl. I am okay, sweetheart, she managed. I was just sad for a minute. But I am better now. Emma padded across the cold marble floor in bare feet and sat down beside her. Just like that. Without hesitation. She leaned her small head against Nora's shoulder. When I am sad, I think about colors, Emma said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Red is angry. Blue is sad. Yellow is happy. What color are you right now? Nora looked down at the girl's small head, at the rabbit she held, at this child who had been stolen and had somehow found her way back to safety because Nora had been brave enough to stand in the wrong place at the right time. "I am all the colors," Nora said. "But maybe a little bit of yellow now that you are here." Emma nodded like this made perfect sense. She closed her eyes and leaned heavier against Nora's shoulder. Within 2 minutes, she was asleep. 3 blocks away, at the warehouse in Georgetown, the night was anything but still. 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through the loading dock, their footsteps synchronized, their movements practiced 1,000 times over. The sound of a door being kicked open echoed through the space. Metal on metal. Orders shouted in low voices. The tactical precision of a military operation except for one crucial detail: this was not the military. This was Luca Bianchi's organization, and they had come to collect a debt. Douglas Hale was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of the warehouse floor. His slicked-back hair was matted with sweat. His manicured hands trembled. His expensive suit, tailored, probably Italian, worth more than Nora made in 2 months, was torn at the collar where they had grabbed him. He saw Luca enter and panic flooded his face. "I can explain," Douglas said, his voice cracking. "I can give you names, I can give you everything, I can, please, I have a family, I have children, I have." Luca's voice cut through like a blade wrapped in ice. "You sold children." No, I can explain, it was Catherine, she was the one who. You put your hands on a woman under your authority and you choked her because she threatened to report you." Douglas's head shook back and forth. His lips moved but no words came out. "You took my daughter," Luca finished. That silence was absolute. The kind of silence that contained an entire universe collapsing. Douglas's face went the color of old paper. His body sagged against the zip ties. He started to cry, not the tears of someone who felt remorse, but the tears of someone who had finally understood that he was going to die. "I can give you 50,000, Douglas choked out. 100,000. Everything I have. Take it. Please take it." Luca did not respond. He simply pulled out his phone and made a call. "It is done," he said in Italian. "He is yours to handle as you see fit." 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up to the warehouse loading dock. 2 men stepped out, members of the Castellano family from New York, rival operators who had been trying to move into the Pacific Northwest for 3 years. They wore charcoal suits and expressions that suggested they had seen every form of human cruelty and were no longer shocked by any of it. Luca walked Douglas to the sedan, the younger man now sobbing, now begging, now offering prayers to a God he had probably never believed in. The 2 Castellano operatives took him by the arms and placed him in the back seat. "He is part of a trafficking network that used my city," Luca said, his accent thickening with rage. "He attempted to destroy my family. Consider this a gesture of goodwill between our organizations." They understood immediately. Douglas screamed as they pulled away from the warehouse, a sound that echoed off the metal walls and then faded into the October night. He was never seen again. Catherine Mercer's destruction was scheduled for dawn. Federal agents in tactical vests and helmets moved through her penthouse like a swarm of dark insects, their footsteps coordinated, their purpose absolute. The raid had been coordinated perfectly, media tipped off exactly 15 minutes before they arrived, ensuring maximum visibility, ensuring every camera would be there to capture the moment Catherine Mercer's empire began to crumble. She stood in her master bedroom wearing a silk robe that probably cost $1,000, her face twisted in rage and disbelief as agents seized her computer, her phone, her financial records, her files. Everything. The evidence of 15 years of trafficking, money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy laid bare in boxes and evidence bags. "This is insane," Catherine spat at the lead agent, a woman named Detective Sarah Chen. "I am on the board of 12 charities. I have donated over $2 million to foster care initiatives. You cannot." "Actually, we can," Detective Chen said flatly. "Federal warrant, signed by Judge Morrison 4 hours ago. You are under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, wire fraud, and racketeering." Catherine's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The cameras outside her penthouse window flashed and flashed and flashed. Within 1 hour, her name was trending on social media. Within 2 hours, every charity she had served on had issued statements of shock and severed their relationship with her immediately. Within 4 hours, her attorney husband, a prominent lawyer whose own career had been built on the reputation of their charitable work, filed for divorce. Federal prosecutors announced charges, 40 years minimum, without possibility of parole. The money she had accumulated disappeared into court-ordered asset seizures. The properties were frozen. The charities that had borne her name removed her from their donor walls. The woman who had built her entire identity on the appearance of goodness, of caring, of being someone who made the world better, was revealed as someone who had profited from the suffering of the most vulnerable children in the city. Her empire did not collapse gradually. It collapsed in one morning, like a building rigged for demolition, like a life constructed entirely on lies finally exposed to daylight. Back at the penthouse, Nora woke to find Emma still sleeping against her shoulder and Luca watching them both from across the room, his expression unreadable. The sun was rising over the water, turning the sky shades of gold and pink. The city was waking up. The news was already spreading. People were learning about Catherine Mercer's arrest. People were learning about the trafficking ring. People were learning that sometimes justice moved fast and hard when it finally decided to move. Nora did not know any of this yet. She only knew that the girl she loved was safe, that her own body was healing, and that the man watching her now had kept his word. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The rain drummed against the cafe window in a steady rhythm, each drop racing down the glass like tiny runners desperate to reach the bottom. Nora sat across from Luca at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Steam no longer rose from it. The cafe smelled like wet earth and espresso, the kind of quiet place where people whispered their secrets. She had been rehearsing this question for 3 months. "Why did you do all this for me?" Her voice trembled slightly, the question barely louder than the rain. The apartment. The job. The everything. You could have given Emma to anyone. You could have left me on that street and nobody would have stopped you. So why? Luca was quiet for a long moment. He did not reach across the table. He did not try to touch her. He simply watched her with those dark eyes that had terrified so many people and now only held something that looked like patience. "Because you gave me my daughter back," he said finally, "when you had every reason to walk away. You protected her for 3 months without knowing who she was or what you would gain. You bled for her. You stood between her and the world." He paused to drink his coffee. Outside, a car drove past, its tires hissing through the wet street. "I grew up like you," Luca continued. "With nothing. With people who took and never gave back. My father beat me unconscious when I was 7. He did it again at 9. I clawed my way out of that life by 16 years old, swore I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me or anyone I loved. I built an empire because empires cannot be broken. But empires are also prisons." He set down his cup with deliberate care. "I swore no child would suffer like I did. No one who protected the vulnerable would be left alone to suffer. And in 15 years of this life, Nora, I have never met anyone like you. Not once." Nora looked down at her coffee. The surface had gone dark and still, like looking into something deep. "I am not special. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Luca said quietly. "Most people freeze. Most people look away. Most people convince themselves it is not their responsibility. You acted. You acted when you were broken and exhausted and terrified. That is not ordinary." The conversation moved to lighter things after that. Luca told her about Emma's progress in therapy, how the girl had started drawing again, how she had laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. Nora shared that she had enrolled in online business classes, that she wanted to eventually run the non-profit independently, that she was learning what it meant to build something instead of just survive. 3 weeks later, Nora attended a family dinner at Luca's house. Not the penthouse, but a sprawling Victorian in a neighborhood where old money and quiet power lived side by side. Marco and Nino were there with their wives, and they greeted Nora with genuine warmth, no trace of their earlier wariness. They had seen what she had done. They had watched her stand between a child and the world. "You are good for him," Marco's wife, Sophia, said while they cleared dishes together. "In 15 years, I have never seen him like this. He reads bedtime stories in different voices." "Different voices, Nora. The man is a legend and he does a squeaky voice for the mouse character." Nora felt something warm bloom in her chest. The evenings accumulated like snow. Shared dinners. Conversations about Emma's favorite books. Luca remembering that Nora took her coffee with 1 sugar and no cream. Nora discovering that he had a small scar on his collarbone from a knife fight when he was 19, that he had learned to play guitar as a way to quiet the anger, that he read poetry in Italian when he could not sleep. One night in March, they watched a movie with Emma. The girl fell asleep between them on the leather couch, her small body rising and falling with each breath. Luca carried her to her room, tucked her under a quilt the color of the ocean. When he returned, Nora was still there. She had not left. She was not running. "I rebuilt my life," Nora said quietly. The television played with the sound off, color shifting across her face. "I stand on my own now. I have saved money. I have a job I care about. I am not the broken woman you found in October." Luca sat beside her, careful to leave space between them, as he had done every night since the warehouse. "I know," he said. "That is why I can finally tell you this." He turned to face her fully. "I have been in love with you since that night. Since the moment you stood between my daughter and the world despite being beaten and broken yourself. But you needed to be whole first. You needed to stand on your own. You needed to become my equal, not someone I rescued. Because love is not rescue, Nora. Love is the choice to stay when you could walk away." Nora's breath came carefully, as if she was afraid to move too fast. "I do not know if I can be part of your world. The crime. The men. The things you do to protect people. I am not asking you to be part of my world," Luca said. His voice was steady, like something carved from stone. "I am asking if I can be part of yours." She looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the man who read bedtime stories in mouse voices. Who remembered her coffee order. Who had waited months for her to become whole. Who had restructured parts of his empire to move away from the things that kept him awake at night. Who had chosen differently because she had shown him it was possible. "Yes," she said. Their first kiss was gentle. Unhurried. It tasted like coffee and rain and months of silent protection finally becoming something spoken aloud. His hand came up to her face with such care that she realized he was trembling slightly. When they pulled apart, Marco and Nino were standing in the hallway, having arrived to pick something up. They had seen everything. Marco elbowed Nino and muttered, "Never thought I would see the day." Nino grinned. "She is good for him. Good for all of us." 6 months later, cherry blossoms bloomed in Volunteer Park, their pale pink petals drifting down like snow in April. Nora and Emma fed ducks at the pond, tossing breadcrumbs in careful handfuls. Luca watched from a nearby bench, Marco and Nino standing at a respectful distance, no longer guards but simply men who had chosen to witness something good. The city had reshaped itself. Douglas Hale's name was forgotten. Catherine Mercer was in federal prison, year 2 of 40, her empire dismantled, her reputation destroyed. The trafficking network was broken. Nora now had $12,400 in her savings account. She ran the nonprofit full-time. Emma no longer flinched when doors opened suddenly. The girl called her Aunt Nora and talked about her without prompting, her voice bright and easy. As they walked back to the car, Emma between them swinging their joined hands, laughing, Nora looked back at the shelter where she used to sleep on concrete floors. At the restaurant where she scrubbed dishes for stolen tips. At the gas station where she used to wash her face in cold water at 3 in the morning. She did not forget those months. She carried them with her. But they no longer defined her. She had stood in the cold and survived. She had protected something precious when she had nothing. And then she had chosen to stay when everything changed. Family is not always bound by blood, she whispered to herself, watching Emma's joy, feeling Luca's steady presence beside her, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved your heart, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that strength is not about never falling but about standing back up. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will wreck you in the best way. And comment below, what would you have done in Nora's position? Would you have brought Emma to Luca or run? We read every single comment. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.